Buenos dias, hello, guten tag, thank you for coming to my talk. I'm going to talk a little bit about myself. My name is Chris Hartjes, I'm Canadian, so I know there are at least two other Canadians here. Mark Story, who I actually know, lives not too far away from me. Wow, that's a hard crowd. And then Corey Fowlerway at the back from Microsoft, he lives about 20 minutes west of where I live in Canada. So I'm a Canadian developer. I've been doing PHP since 1998, so it makes me like a super old man of the internet. And so you're probably wondering why I'm here, what is my connection to Cake PHP? Well, I actually used to contribute to Cake PHP back 2000, from about 2005 or 6 until maybe about 2008 or 9. And I believe of the crowd here, only myself, Mariano, and Larry were at the very first Cake Fest down in Orlando. So, you know, Cake PHP was the first project that I ever contributed to, so I kind of have it's like a nice nostalgic feeling. I check up on what's going on with Cake PHP every once in a while. So, my thing is, I've been spending the last 10 years trying to convince people to write more tests for their code. This could be unit tests, this could be integration tests, just write, and like Phil, I swear a lot, but I don't blaspheme, so write some fucking tests, people, it's not hard. So I spend my time evangelizing. I work for a consulting company based out of the US, but I work from home, so I'm extremely lucky. Company's called Rove. We do all sorts of crazy consulting things, mostly in PHP, but we cover a whole bunch of stuff. I just recently started there, and I work for a client that sends out millions and millions of SMS messages, so I'm busy helping get their PHP code up to speed with modern conventions, PSR2. It's some old crufty Zend Framework 1 app that I'm busily trying to get up to Zend Framework 2. Just to show that I still do Cake PHP stuff, I have a Cake PHP app that I maintain that I first started working on in 2007, and I am scared to death to do anything to it in form of upgrading it. So I just kind of lurch along, and every once in a while I check to see what's going on. I'm like, man, it sure would be nice if I could use that, but I don't have the month of nights and weekends available to me to do it. So what am I here to talk about? Well, testing is hard, okay? People can write tests, but when I first got into it in 2003, when I discovered Simple Test, I had the experience of, I used to work for an adult dating website. One of the things, like for traveling businessmen, they want to cheat on their wives while they're on the road. All right, paid the bills, helped pay the mortgage on my house, so it didn't bother me that much. But my wife made sure I didn't have a profile on there. And I find that when people get into testing and discover it, usually what happens is that they have some horrific event that happens to them, where they've been working forever on the app, it launches, and everything goes to shit, the site is down, and everybody's working tons and tons of overtime. I ended up working 120 hours of overtime in a approximately 6-week period. So, you know, 4 hours every night for 6 weeks. My wife threatened to leave me if I didn't come home. So after that happened, I had to bribe her with a nice diamond tennis bracelet with the bonus that I got for all the overtime. So I guess maybe it worked out. We've been married 16 years, so I guess she stuck around afterwards. But when this happened, I was like, I just don't want this to happen to me ever again. What can I personally do to make sure that I go home on time? Because at that time I was commuting into, because I live outside Toronto, so I was commuting in and on the train, and it was 90 minutes for me to get in and 2 hours to get home. So I was losing a big chunk of my life. I have 2 daughters who are now 9 and 15, but they were much younger. And I mean, I'll be honest, I was missing hanging out with them. I would come home from work and they would already be in bed or just about to go to bed, so I never got to see them. So I was determined to find a way to go home on time. And like, how can we stop these things from happening? So, I discovered Extreme Programming, the book, right? One of the project managers had it, and I quickly read through it. And I was like, oh, they have this thing on unit testing. Oh, this sounds like exactly what we need. Find all these problems as opposed to clients finding them, which is kind of the default method for web developers these days still, 16 years later. So I discovered unit testing. PHP Unit actually was not even available in any kind of public release back then, so it was Simple Test, and just over time, I taught myself how to do all this stuff. And so the reason why I keep pushing on this, like, I wish there was somebody like me. Okay, well, maybe not exactly like me, but out there when I was trying to learn stuff, because I had to harass numerous people just to get basic information. So, but one of the things I discovered is that there's a whole bunch of things that you have to understand in order to do testing. So how many people here have played this awesome card game called Magic the Gathering? Okay, a few. It's okay to admit that you did, because I still play it. A big chunk of the sales from my books goes to feed my magic card addiction. So, and this is not a picture of my collection of cards. I have cards. I actually have a lot more cards than these. But in Magic the Gathering, there's this concept of you have the game itself and the rules of the game, and then there's the metagame that surrounds it. How you figure out what cards you should play, what decks you should play, strategies for doing common things. And so I kind of discovered with testing, it goes beyond just the actual thing about testing. There's all these other things that you need to understand in order to be effective. And so I've been thinking about how to group these things. This talk used to have a 7 Deadly Sins theme to it. And then I delivered it at Ski PHP, which is in Utah, which is full of Mormons. And let's just say I got some comments afterwards that maybe talking about sin in relation to testing wasn't necessarily the best thing. So we've changed it a little bit. So there's basically, I've grouped things that we have. There's kind of 7 common obstacles. And so I apologize if I rush through this talk. This is normally an hour-long talk, and so I wasted some time talking about my relationship with cake. So we're going to plow through this. I would be happy to answer questions forever after this talk, after lunch. I am here through the end of the day. I have to leave early tomorrow morning, but I'm happy to talk to people about this. So first obstacle, configuration of stuff, right? It used to be that configuring the tools to do all the testing is difficult, right? But what can we do? Of course, we can use Composer, and like I said, people have been talking about. I agree with people when say that Composer is probably one of the best things that's ever happened to the PHP community, giving us a package manager, right, and dependency management that we didn't have before. Pair was okay, but Pair had its time. Pair had problems. Pair didn't want to fix them, so now we have Composer, right? So again, with the configuration stuff, you can use it, right? You modify, and also with configuration stuff, I'm going to talk about modifying your project to fit the defaults of the tools whenever possible, and avoid fighting with tools. Anyone who follows me on Twitter saw me like ranting and pissing and moaning about I was trying to get some ORM to work yesterday, and I eventually abandoned it and found something else that did the job in like about 15 minutes. But I highly recommend that people avoid fighting tools. But let's talk about these, right? So for configuration, right? Composer plus Packagist. People have been seeing this, right? Library management, very critical. You keep your dependencies as part of the project instead of being installed globally. I mean, one of the hardest things that I've found in my experience is when you don't control the server that your code runs on, you literally have to beg some grumpier than me sysadmin to like, can we please upgrade PHP? Can we please add this other library? And most of the time the default answer is, fuck you, I'm not upgrading anything. So one of the beauties of using something like this now is you can have all your dependencies installed locally, and even better, you share that Composer JSON file with all the other developers working on your project, and then they will all be using the same versions of tools. So you're really working hard to eliminate the well works for me problem. So people have seen what the JSON stuff looks, so I can kind of skip that. But also a humongous benefit to Composer now, making your own packages available is easy. I have a package that I created that's a PHP library for this tool called Browser Mod Proxy, which I use in my automated UI testing that just allows me to manipulate the headers. And the place I was working before I am now, we used to use host files for development to point services at different locations internally, and that was always a humongous pain to test, so I discovered Browser Mod Proxy. And once I had the PHP SDK working, publishing it on Packagist took me about 5 minutes. When I consider what it used to be to do with Pair, it's like I would probably still be waiting to find out whether Pair Pair agreed that my library was formatted properly. So, and also a good thing about Composer is that its default is to put everything in one directory. So when you actually start to go searching through code, like I do sometimes to try to figure things out, I often look at the tests. I usually refuse to use any kind of package that doesn't have a test, because it shows at least the developer gives a fraction of the shit about things that I do. So to me, having tests is important, obviously. So, but the thing too is when we talk about using configuration stuff, when you're configuring your project and you're making things for people, avoid the "my project is so unique" mentality. I have a phrase that I like to use where everyone thinks they're a special snowflake, right? Chances are what you're doing, someone else has done, and it's 99% the same as yours. So try to avoid recreating things just because you have one little tiny thing that's different from what somebody else has done. I mean, the sign of good code is something that you can extend to fit your needs, so avoid reinventing things. Because when you start doing your own unique things for your own use cases, it makes it really difficult to integrate with other people's projects. For example, I mean, I was struggling with Eloquent, right? I know there's some Laravel people. I know Phil does Laravel, and Phil and I have gone on and on about how stupid shit that they do sometimes. The more difficult you make your libraries and tools to use with other people's stuff, the less likely people are going to use them. And more importantly, for lazy developers like me, the less likely people are going to fix your broken shit for you, right? So that's really important. Okay, and one of the things I learned early on when I did some early Rails stuff and I started realizing that a lot of what Rails was doing could be ported over to PHP, I think the big thing that they did was convention over configuration matters. Give a sane set of defaults and then people will be more likely to use your stuff, especially if you can then configure and change, okay? And for me, Cake PHP was doing that for me, that they had a great set of conventions, and if you followed them, everything integrated nicely, but when you needed to do something different, they were definitely giving you hooks and opportunities to do it, okay? So let's talk about another obstacle, education, right? Developers, when you are learning, you are simply not taught how to test. It's just a thing, because like this is kind of what happens when I start educating people. This is a great quote about educating people. Sometimes you have to give up on people, right? Not because you don't care, but because they don't. Developers are not taught anywhere, as far as I can tell, to do testing, to do unit testing when they're learning. Although there are lots of good tutorials out there for languages like Python and Ruby, anything that has a nice REPL. When I say REPL, people know what I mean? Yes? Okay. When you have a REPL, you can test things out and try things out, and just people aren't taught how to test. They're taught how to just slam a bunch of code together and get something working, especially in PHP, where it's so easy to just jam your business logic, presentation logic, all that stuff together. People aren't taught when they're learning how to separate things. Everybody has created the big, nasty spaghetti PHP application. Everybody's done it. I'm sure some people here are still doing it. But it's the lack of education. So what can we do to reduce it, right? Big thing is, it's impossible to learn how to write tests in isolation. And by that, what I mean is that I don't think if I gave, I mean, I love people to buy my books, but I'm pretty sure that if I just give you a book and nothing else, you're not going to figure out how to write tests. You need to find other people who are thinking about doing the same things, right? So one of the ways to do it is through mentorship. I participated in the PHP mentoring program that was started up a couple of years ago. 3 of the guys I mentored have gone on to have like really good success in their careers, and now they are giving talks about testing on the conference circuit over in North America. So that makes me feel good, and it's like I find mentoring is like a really easy way to give back to the community. If you're not the type of coder that can create frameworks and other stuff, but you have a lot of knowledge to offer people like I do, mentoring is an amazing way to give back. So I hang out in the PHP mentoring channel on Freenode. I highly encourage you to come and hang out. So let's talk about education, right? Takes 2 to test. I'm a big believer in pair programming. How many people here pair program? A few. Being a remote worker, I find many problems are actually very easily solved through screen sharing. You know, you can use Tmux, you can use, there was one Screen Hero, like there's all sorts of Google Hangouts, there's all sorts of things you can do. I think it's very critical to find other people who are into testing and then you just pair with them, and it's as simple as people are talking through a test. It's like the equivalent of, people have heard of the concept of rubber ducking. You have a problem, you have some inanimate object. For me, it's my cats that I have at home. I scream at them in German when I can't get stuff to work. Because my background is German. I learned German as a kid, but my wife is from England and she doesn't speak any German, so swearing at my cats is about the only opportunity I get. So I talk to them. So it's equivalent of having a person to pair program with, and at least the cat like looks at me and meows when I'm asking him, do you think this entity is good enough? Meow. Okay, then we're going to go on to the next thing. Because also part of the education stuff is getting code reviews, right? How many people where they work have code reviews as a regular part of their development process? That's good. I have found that in terms of like improving code quality, if you can do one thing, institute code reviews, that every bit of code that gets written has to be checked by another developer. Even I, as an internet superstar, are not allowed to just simply force my code through unless it's for my own project, and then I always approve my own pull requests. But code reviews are really one of the best ways to improve quality, right? And by improving quality, then you end up discovering things like how to write testable code and how to decouple things, and other people start pointing out the mistakes that you make. And I treat code reviews as really a non-adversarial thing, even though people would probably think that I would be calling people assholes and stuff during them. But the goal is to have the code better, not to tear down the person that wrote them. So to sum up the education side, right? Mentoring, so find someone who can mentor you. Or if you feel like you have a lot to offer, find other more junior developers who can help so that everybody's skill levels get risen up. Because the better the programmers are, the less shitty code that we have to deal with, right? And I mean, I like the mentoring stuff because my own apprentices have gone on to some success, and that makes me personally proud about it, right? And doing this mentoring stuff and sharing what you've learned through giving conference talks, I usually talk about 4 or 5 times a year, so this is probably close to my, like, I don't know, I've been speaking since 2008. So I don't know, I must be coming up pretty close on 100 talks that I've given. So for me, this is how I can give back, because I could never write a framework. So this is an easy way for me to do it. Because come over to the mentoring side. It's useless to resist. I'll help you guys out. So another obstacle to figuring out how to test your code is coupling. Tightly coupled code is extremely common. It's by tightly coupled, what I mean is that in terms of dependencies, you have an object that depends on this thing, depends on this thing, and then when you actually start getting into writing unit tests where you are mocking your dependencies and creating test doubles for things, that's when you quickly realize how bad your code has gotten and that you can't test it. So we're going to talk about some ways that we can learn about coupling so we can actually write better tests. You should learn about dependency injection, you should learn about Demeter's law, and you should understand why coupling is bad. So in terms of like, you probably know dependency injection by a less complicated name. You probably already do it. I commonly refer to it as passing shit in as parameters. So that's all dependency injection is. I know it's a nice fancy label that the computer science people apply to make it look complicated. It's just you're passing things in a constructor or using a setter to pass it in. That's it. So you're probably already doing it. So we got a little quick example of like, that's kind of like what tightly coupled code looks like, right? That's bad coupling. And the other one down below is good coupling, because the difference is when you're writing tests, if you're trying to figure out what you're trying to create a dependency and create a mock version of bar, you can't do it because it's being created inside. It has no visibility to you. So instead, all you have to do is just create it outside and pass it in. So again, it's like a really simple concept. It's when I learned about this, I was like, wow, I always thought this was kind of complicated, but no, it's like people are doing this already. They just have to understand the reason to do this is that we want testable code. So how can we help out to make our code less coupled so it's easier to test? Dependency injection containers, service locators. If you use any of the common frameworks these days, Laravel, you're using Silex, you're using Zen, you're using whatever, chances are, or Symfony, they're using dependency injection containers and service locators. Pimple or whatever, I mean, there's lots of them out there. That's the easiest way to have your dependencies available to you so you can inject them in. My experiences have been there's 2 types of dependency injection. You have the constructor injection and you have setter injection, just to kind of show you. Like, it's just constructor, containers. We'll talk about containers real quick. See, I'm so rushed because I got so much to go over. Containers are simply a way to store something for later retrieval. And just think about defining my stuff in my bootstrap sequence. Most frameworks these days are front controller frameworks. So there's usually some kind of bootstrapping sequence that you're going to do. And that's usually when you'll like instantiate your container and then start shoving all your dependencies in it. And then you make the container available. I mean, I know there's like, one way to do it is actually, you could use like the globals, super global, if you want like a really ghettoized dependency injection container. Just something that's globally available. Even though global variables are generally bad, but that's kind of one way to cheat through it if you're trying to like retrofit a legacy app. So again, this is my preferred way to do dependency injection on the constructor, and then we just assign them in. There are people who are Java refugees who like their getters and setters, so you can do the same thing. Dependency injection containers, service locators they're just simply globally available ways to retrieve your stuff. But one caveat, be sure to not make your code dependent on the container. A very common thing I have seen is where people pass in the container, like every single object that they create, the container gets passed in as a parameter. And that's okay because it's kind of like an easy way for you to make sure everything's available. But, and I agree, this doesn't happen very often, but if you ever need to refactor your code and use a different dependency injection container, even though I can't imagine why you would ever want to change the container. I don't know, maybe you're sick of using $ global and you want to actually have something in there. You have to do a lot of work to refactor. So try to keep from passing the container in, so it's not dependent on it. But we talk about dependencies. Another obstacle to writing tests is that your code just has too many dependencies. This is one of the things you never know it until you try to create mocks for them. And also every dependency you're adding to your code, you should really be trying to justify it. So let's go over some of that. So mocking, I know in the PHP world it's known as mocking because the built-in methods for PHP unit are get mock. The actual correct pedantic thing is for test doubles. So usually I use the word test doubles. But all you're doing if you're mocking stuff is you're creating versions of your dependencies so you can put them in a known state. So usually when I go to write test for legacy code, I will look and figure out all the dependencies. What's passed? Does it have a database handle? How's that being passed in? Is it using other objects, other methods? How do I get those into there? So when you write a test, it's like you're creating a scenario where things need to be in a specific state, and then we figure out what all our dependencies are, and then put them into the states that we need to make our test scenario work, right? So the easiest way to see if your code is testable is can you easily inject the dependencies in? On my blog, which I don't blog, I used to blog a lot more. I'm coming up on, I don't know, like end of 2013 was the last time I made a blog post. I do a newsletter now instead, giving people the same info. I did a little thing on just kind of from a high level understanding mock objects. If you look at my blog, littleheart.net, it has a nice search thing, you can find it. But I think it's important that people understand about mocking, and it's usually the surest sign that you have some problem with your code, that there's too many dependencies, that when you set things up and you're creating all your test doubles, the amount of code to do the setup is like 10, 20 times the amount of code than when you're actually running your test. I've unfortunately written tests where I've had like 100 lines of setting up mocks and stuff, and then the actual test itself is like 3 lines. Create an object, pass a bunch of stuff in, assert that something happened. So that's usually a sign that we have a bunch of code that's too coupled, or you have a God object, or you have just something where your classes are doing too much work, and we need to break this down into smaller pieces. So dependencies is an obstacle. But here's another one. This is the toughest one to get people to overcome. But this is like usually a resistant, not from the developers, because a lot of developers want to write tests, but they can't because their bosses won't let them or won't give them permission or some other stupid shit. So this is a very common thing that we hear, right? You are paid to write code, not tests. Okay. So if you're looking to try to find a way to convince your manager where you work to write tests, pay very close attention to this section, okay? Because these are the truths, right? You are not getting paid to write code. You are getting paid to solve problems. This is at the high level of the job of a programmer. I don't get paid to write code. I get paid to solve problems. I get handed problems like, Chris, we need to fix this thing. What is the best solution to this problem? It's never, hey, Chris, what's the code to fix this, to solve this? It's always about a solution to a problem, right? So we're getting paid to solve problems. That's why you learn how to do all these things. That's why you're at conferences, to learn new things, because you want to learn how to solve problems. But here's what happens, that many people discount the costs of actually fixing the bugs that are found, right? They treat the developer's time as if it's the same no matter what state in the development workflow or what state in the release flow that the bug is found. And also many people also discount the cost of missed opportunities that bugs create. If I go back to my experience where I worked all that overtime, there were so many other things that we could have been doing, adding new features or fixing things that would actually provide real money to the business, but instead we're having to fix stupid fucking bugs that crept into the code because we weren't doing anything with testing. And that's part of the culture of where you work and plus the availability of the tools. These days, the tools to write tests are so easy to install, and there are probably millions of pages on the internet written about how to use these things. My books and videos made me $27,000 last year for a little tiny niche, and that's in American dollars, not in Canadian snow pesos. So we're talking real money. You know, I joke now I'm happy at my new job because I get paid in freedom dollars. So I always get a little bit more in the bank when the money goes in. Now there is no longer an excuse that there is no information out there on how to test. Okay, so let's talk about this, right? About test-driven development, because that's the one that I advocate. Although it's kind of like sometimes it's test in the middle development. I tend to kind of create a prototype until it's kind of doing what I want. And then once it's partially solving the problem that I'm trying to fix, then I go back and I start writing all the tests for my scenarios. And I literally do write all the tests and then keep writing code until the tests pass, because that's really the only way to do it. But test-driven development is actually about shifting the bug fixing to a cheaper part of the development process, right? And TDD is actually, it's a design pattern. You're using tests to guide how you build things. When you get into TDD, you find yourself creating small, single-purpose objects with only a few small methods in them, and those methods don't have a lot of code in them. Because you quickly realize how to break the problem down. If you want to think of this, I think this is a good analogy. Think of code that's well tested and designed to be well tested, like Lego blocks, right? I loved Lego as a kid. My kids like Lego. I still have a scar on my foot, on my right foot, from where I stepped on some Lego that my daughter left on the stairs one time when I went downstairs in the middle of the night. So, but well-tested apps, they feel like you're building applications by putting Lego blocks together, right? Because you're forced to build your app a certain way when you decide to do the test first. So I'm going to explain this little thing at the bottom here, this 20 to 40% time. So one of the rare times that Microsoft and IBM were getting along in the early 2000s, they commissioned a study where they where they had a problem and they got a couple teams together. And they asked some of the teams to solve the problem using test-driven development, and the other teams could do whatever the fuck they wanted. So they were given time, off you go, and then when everybody was done, what they found is that the teams that did test-driven development, it took them 20 to 40% longer to solve the problem, because tests, especially in PHP, tests are code, right? So you have to write code in order to have tests. But what they found is that there were 40 to 90% fewer bugs in the code from the people that did TDD. So if you're like me and you want to convince your boss or convince your team to start writing tests, you can cheat and say, well, with only 20% more time, 90% fewer bugs. I mean, only the most heartless of managers is going to not agree to let you do some of that. You could even lie and say, hey, dude, it's only one extra day a week and we'll have like 90% fewer bugs. It's going to be awesome. We can crush it, right? So that's good. I also think that tests are essential to help you go home from work on time every day. So a little confession time. As I slowly work my way up through my career to more and more senior positions, I always try to make sure I'm in a position where I don't have to work overtime. Where I used to work, deployments were a nightmare. There was like a rotating selection of developers who had to stay on call. They had to stay up till 3 in the morning to babysit a release because of the commitment to testing wasn't there. And the holy grail, of course, of all this is moving towards continuous deployment, where you have incredibly well-tested code, you write code, you push it up into whatever version control system you're using, Git or Subversion, or I even remember using CVS, that's how old I am. And you want things to be triggered and it runs through all your tests and things go up automatically after passing all your tests, that deployments should be a non-event. And when deployments become a non-event, you get to go home. I mean, I work from home, so I like to actually be able to like leave my office and close the door and go upstairs and hang out with my wife and kids. And so part of the path for me to get that was learning how to write testable code so I can prove all my stuff works, so that when I leave for the day, I know that everything that I've given to them is working 100% the way it's supposed to be. I'm sure some of the people here think that working overtime is some sort of badge of honor. I think it's bullshit. I don't want to work a single minute of overtime because I have all the tools and skills available to me to make sure that I don't have to work overtime. So we talked about opportunity cost. This is the slide. You want to convince people? And I believe one of these numbers is actually too long. Let's say a bug found during development costs X, whatever the developer's time is X, okay? If your QA department finds it, that bug is probably now going to cost your company 2X. You have to go back and fix it. QA person has to go and verify. Now, maybe if you have a staging server, if a bug makes it past you, it makes it past the QA person, and then somebody else finds it on staging, now you're probably looking at a 5 times the cost it would have been if you'd found it during development. Because now you have the time of people checking staging, now the QA person has to recheck things, you have to go back and check your code 5 times. Bugs found in production, actually I think that 10x is low. I think it might actually be almost as high as 100, in some cases 1,000. I mean, there are companies like, for example, Amazon knows exactly how much money they lose every minute that their site is down. So it would be incredibly important to them that no bugs make it into production. But just think about this. Think about what actually happens when a serious bug makes it into production. Probably your company probably goes into panic mode. You have like 5 or 6 people trying to figure out what's going on, and really the one person who probably knows how to fix it is the developer that could have found that problem via a test during development. what I have found is that when you stick very strictly to TDD and you have very high code coverage up in the 90s, the only bugs that make it into production are like really weird, strange edge cases. And that's kind of what you want. You want to have all the expected things covered. It's just the weird stuff that somehow creeps through. But think about this. Like I said, I think that 10 is low. You're talking like 100. You could be costing your company thousands of dollars a minute that your site's not working. So think about that when you start objecting to doing tests. So we got about 8 slides, so we're doing okay for time. So another obstacle to getting proper testing in place is environments. Lack of control, okay? Like I mentioned before, you have the asshole sysadmins that won't upgrade systems for you. Back in the day when I worked for that cheat on your wife dating site, we used to have BSD machines, OpenBSD I think, that had this idea of jails. So every developer got like a nice black Intel box that had as much RAM as they could get, and I'm sure it was some really infinitesimally small number compared to today. I probably have more memory on my phone than what those servers had. So they created little jails. So we could have like a sort of small version of our production environment available to each individual developer had their own, so we could kind of figure out to debug things. So that was the exception. I've worked at places where just everybody worked on the same shared system, and you can imagine what kind of shit show that is. When we get close to release time and everybody's trying to figure out why their stuff isn't working, the poor server just says no mas and falls over, right? So how can we fix some of this stuff? So actually Composer actually can play double duty here for enforcing environmental consistency. Vagrant and other virtual machines are key, and repeatable automated processes are part of it. So let's talk a bit about how Composer helps, right? Composer lets you lock down the environment of your libraries, right? You can have Composer lock files. Everybody should be using the same Composer JSON configuration. You just pass around to developers. When they try to create a version of the app, everybody should be using the same version of the libraries. And that, again, that goes a super long way towards eliminating the works on my machine bug, because that was always one that kind of killed us. When I was working in an environment that everybody had all those little jail boxes, some people would get root on their servers and some wouldn't, and then they would upgrade packages and like, oh, I'm using this version of this library that's different from everybody else. So of course the shit's broken, right? So if you're in any kind of like technical lead position, you should be working extremely hard to eliminate this works on my machine problem. So another easy way to do that, of course, is Vagrant. Learn it, live it, love it. Again, I think Vagrant is like one of these things that has just made developers' lives so much easier. Consistable, repeatable creation of environments. Who here has heard of the PuffPet project? Okay, well, maybe a few people. For people who don't know what PuffPet is, it's a web interface to allow you to create Vagrant machines. It uses Puppet and has a really nice, it's a friend of mine, Juan Treminio, who I worked with a number of years ago, set it up that it's puffpet.org. You just go to it, click I want a box with this version of PHP, MySQL, all these other tools. It creates all the files that Vagrant needs. You download it, then you run Vagrant, and it'll download the base box and install everything for you. So again, a really super easy way to make sure that everybody that is working on your project has the same system. I have noticed that some open source projects that do kind of that server level stuff are actually starting to include Vagrant configuration files so that you can have a box that's identical to what the developer is using, okay? So about repeatable stuff, right? People make mistakes all the time. You notice my little typo on there? Computers make the mistakes that you tell them to make. Because computers are great at doing the same thing over and over and over and over and over again and doing it exactly the same way. Humans, not so much. When we work on things, we have our own subtle, our own subconscious decisions about, many times if you have like a really complicated piece of code, you'll be very reluctant to test it because you know it's kind of fragile, and it's late and I want to go watch Doctor Who, or I'm going to go play Magic tonight, and man, I don't, what time is it? Oh man, it's already after 5. I don't want to come up with all these other scenarios. So get commit minus M YOLO, and everything gets pushed up, right? So repeato. Look, like I say, look at your own procedures. Not just like look at your own coding. If you find yourself doing the same thing 3 or 4 times manually, automate it. I'm a Vim user, so fuck you all that don't use Vim, and I use macros all the time. Yes, I use macros all the time. PHP Storm, piece of shit. So if you find opportunities to automate, even if you do use one of those subpar IDEs, look very closely if you can script things. Very common tasks that you find yourself doing over and over again, repeat those. So the whole goal of all this automation stuff, even with deployment, right? You want to automate your deploys, you want to automate your pushes to staging. Again, all those tools are there to automate a lot of things, because one of my big goals too is that I want to save my brain power, well, half of it for figuring out the best magic cards that I can play with, but the other half of my brain is being reserved for actually solving difficult problems. Remembering the sequence of a call for something, remembering how to manually push something up to the staging server. That stuff I do not want to have to remember, because I don't want that popping up when I'm trying to think of something else, or when I'm yelling at my kid over sticking candy wrappers under the couch again, that in my brain suddenly remembers how to rsync things up to the staging server. I don't want random things like that popping up in my head. I want to automate things so I can get on to solving more and more difficult problems, because most programmers, as they advance in their career, the problems that they're asked to solve are not easier, they're more and more difficult, and I want to use my brain to solve difficult problems. All right? So again, take a look at what you're doing. There's probably opportunities to automate things that you hadn't thought of. So one of the last ones, obstacles to testing, of course, is motivation, right? Where is testing most valuable? Maintenance programming. Maintenance programming sucks. Nobody really wants to spend their career fixing shit that other people wrote. People want to do clean projects, they want to fool around with new things, so maintenance programming sucks. So that's, especially if you're working on a legacy app that has tests, like, man, I got to grind my way through this and figure out who the fuck wrote this, and then you find out, like, why did you do this? Like, this is so stupid. Why would you ever think this? And then you go back and find, oh yeah, because 3 years ago you told me to do it this way. And you're like, oh, really? Like tests, I always say that tests also help protect future you from present you. So the present you is almost always dumber than the future you. So what can we do to like help with the motivation, right? Good test suites actually make fixing bugs easy, because if someone reports a bug to you, whether it's like a Jira ticket or you get something for Cake PHP, someone reports a bug, often they will be nice and send you a pull request with either a fix, or if they're even better, they'll send you a test that reproduces the bug. And then you can take that test and just fix the code until everything passes. And also, good test suites make it easy to integrate new things, because that's kind of a nice way to like get out of the maintenance programming sucks, is the opportunity to put new things and new. I always look for excuses to put new tools into my apps, because it keeps me from getting distracted. So a good test suite means you can put something new in, run all your tests. Did I break something over here? Did I break something over there? Did this thing work exactly as I expected? Awesome. So it's good. So, and again, good test suites again mean more time worrying about big problems. You will know if you have really good coverage. You run your test, you will know if you've broken something somewhere else. Now, I want to be clear that 100% code coverage is achievable. Don't let anyone ever tell you that it's not. It's just simply, about motivation. But really good coverage means that you will instantly know if you've broken something. And also, really good test coverage also means that you now have some internal documentation for developers if they want to use your application, your library, your package, whatever you're doing. If you have a good test suite with coverage, they've done everything. They've used every method that they have, every publicly available method that they have. I do this all the time to figure out how to use something. I can go look at the tests. So good test suites mean more time to worry about solving the big problems, like where we're going to go for lunch instead of fixing the bug. And good test suites also mean less time worrying about regressions in your code. Regressions are what kill people, unintended side effects from their stuff. So we've gotten to the end, so now we go to the part where I do my shameless self-promotion. I've written two self-published books about testing. So I have one on how to kind of refactor your PHP code to make it more testable, where I cover most of the things that I talked about in the talk. And then I wrote a PHP unit cookbook, just kind of common ways to learn how to do the common things that PHP unit offers to you. So those are the two grumpy-testing.com, grumpyphpunit.com. Please buy my book. I like to be able to keep purchasing magic cards. Thank you. So we've gotten to the end. You can feed my ego in a variety of ways. You can email me, chartjes@littleheart.net. I read every single email that gets sent to me that's not flagged as spam. I try to answer everyone that's sent to me directly. You can find me on Twitter, where I have tweeted, and this is not a lie, at least 56,000 times about things on Twitter. That's the easiest way to get a hold of me and ask me questions. You can ask me anything. I read all emails and tweets. If you like this talk, please go to Joined In. I'm going to leave the link up here for a minute. You can go rate the talk. I do like feedback. I tend to retire talks after a while. My record is 17 times giving a particular talk. This is probably my 6th time giving this talk, so I'm always looking for feedback on how to make this talk more valuable to people from all different scales of skill. Because I find testing is one of these things that you can't really teach to beginning programmers for a language because they have to understand the language first before they can go write tests. So how are we doing for time? I have 1 minute and 56 seconds. So how about we all get the fuck out of here and go have some lunch?